Good evening and welcome to the January 8, 2019 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available to the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department and the city attorney's office and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman and Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-on sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the planning commission, not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. The roll call, Ms. Zarnicki, please.
Mr. Apahidian.
Here.
Ms. Cruz.
Here.
Mr. Faison.
Here.
Ms. Fowler.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krant.
Here.
Mr. Rahman.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Mr. Tadapali.
Here.
Quorum present. Before we move on to the second item on the agenda, I just want to let Mr. Sabadan introduce our newest members of the Planning Commission this evening.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce the Planning Commission and the public to Sadak Rahman, our newest Planning Commission member. Welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you. And I'd also like to introduce the Planning Commission to our newest student representative, Hemanth Tadapali. Welcome aboard. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 2 on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The item 5, the conditional rezoning for Cooper's Hawk was incorrectly listed on the agenda as a public hearing. It's actually not a public hearing. So I would request that anyone making the motion to approve the agenda would approve it subject to that change.
Okay, thank you. We will do that. We'll make that modification. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda subject to changing item number 5 from a public hearing.
Moved by Mr. Faison and seconded by Mr. Tagle. Roll call, Ms. Zarnicki, please.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Ms. Fowler.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krant.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Apahidian.
Yes. Item number 3, approval of the minutes for the December 11, 2018 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Moved by Mr. Krent, seconded by Mr. Faison. Roll call, Ms. Zarnicki, please.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Ms. Fowler.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krant.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Apahidian.
Yes.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Item number 4, public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on anything that is not on the agenda? Please come forward and sign in. Thank you.
I know that, good evening, I know that you don't have a question and answer segment on your agenda, but I did have just briefly, I can see you have important business to attend to this evening. I just have 3 inquiries that I'm hoping that you could comment on at the end of the meeting, not as a question and answer, but just the factual part of it. The first thing I had a question about was who places the development proposals on the city council agenda. I asked that last night at the city council meeting, and Ms. Bloom said that she takes care of the legalities of it, but she doesn't actually put it on the agenda. And I never did find out, and I'm just wondering if you know, is it the city manager's office that actually legally places it on the agenda? That was just my first inquiry. The second that I would like to know, and I know if I just spoke with Mr. Sabadan on a one-on-one basis, he would be very helpful. He always has been. But I just think sometimes these inquiries other people besides myself are interested in them, and I know a lot of people that watch your meetings on YouTube or the filming of it would appreciate it. What body or what legal authority tells the developer that he can build a private road on the property that he owns? Maybe there isn't one, I don't know. And the third one is, if a developer's proposal is approved by the city council, does the developer have a legal time limit to take advantage of that proposal, or can he sit on it indefinitely? I'd appreciate your attention to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak? If not, we will move on to item number 5. Before we move on to the item, Mr. Hudson, did you want to?
Mr. Fittian, I recused myself the last study session when this item was before us because of the apparent conflict. I don't think it's a real conflict, but an apparent one. Maybe giving the appearance of impropriety since the lawyer for this proposal in our office, and I would like to be recused again from participating in this discussion and decision.
Sure. You may be recused if there's no other comment or no opposition to that from other planning commission members.
Thank you.
Sure.
Make sure you come back.
I'll be back.
So we will continue with item number 5. So this is not a public hearing. We had a public hearing the first time at the last meeting for this item. Conditional rezoning file number CR-JPLN 2016-001, proposed Cooper's Hawk Winery and Restaurant north side of Big Beaver between Troy and Frankton, section 22 from R1 one-family residential to BB Big Beaver District. Mr. Carla.
Thank you and good evening to the Planning Commission and the public. The Planning Commission last considered this matter at their last meeting on December 11th. I do want to note that the applicant has not made any changes to the proposed site plan that was reviewed by the Planning Commission. So you're reviewing the same site plan that was reviewed at the December 11th meeting. Just for a little background, the applicant is requesting to conditionally rezone a 2.19 acre site. As a condition of the rezoning is the site plan as presented. The rezoning is to develop a 12,000 square foot restaurant, and the site is located on the north side of Big Beaver between Frankton and Troy. The site has split zoning. There is one small sliver of parcel that is zoned BB, Big Beaver. The remaining 4 or 5 parcels are all zoned R1E. And again, the request is to rezone the entire portion of the site from R1E to Big Beaver. We do know that Big Beaver zoning is located to the south and portions of the east and west, as well as R1E again to the north and portions of the east and west. Just a quick reference in regards to the site plan itself. You'll note the yellow box is the actual building itself. It's located at the corner of Frankton and Big Beaver. Again, the building itself does meet all the form-based district requirements. It's a 12,000 square foot building, and the kind of the curvature arrow there is the drop-off area for the proposed building. There are 2 remaining points of access, both off Troy Street. The site is improved with 141 parking spaces, and again, the drop-off area is located adjacent to Troy Street. The application tonight is seeking a recommendation of approval for the conditional rezoning to City Council. Again, that's with the site plan, as well as a special use for a 1-story building on Big Beaver. They did receive the 2 required variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's the reason why the Planning Commission had to defer action on this item to tonight, is that they were not allowed to grant approval with the need for the variances, which again were approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. At that December 11th meeting, there were a number of items that were up for discussion. This included the development itself, as well as the amount of off-street parking, the width of the side streets, whether or not there should be alternative access to the site off Frankton rather than just access off of Troy Street. If there was any issues with truck traffic, delivery, etc., location and screening of the dumpster, etc. Again, I want to know that there have not been any changes to the site plan from what the Planning Commission last reviewed. With regards specifically to the Zoning Board of Appeals, it went to the Zoning Board of Appeals in December. They were required to receive two variances. The first was a build-to line along Troy Street. This is an unusual parcel as it's got 3 front yards. It's got a Big Beaver front yard, a Troy Street front yard, and a Frankton Drive front yard. They again placed the building at the hard corner of Frankton Street and Big Beaver, so they were required to get a variance from the setback on Troy Street. They did obtain that variance. In addition, along Troy Street, there is parking that is in front of the building, between the building and Troy Street itself. They were required to get a variance for that relief, and they did receive that relief from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So with all that being said, we do still find that there are 3 remaining issues that the applicant should address as part of their approval. The first is to ensure that all shrubs that are located along Troy and Frankton Street are at least a minimum of 42 inches at the time of planting. This is in order to screen the parking that does front on those single-family homes on those 2 streets. In addition, they are deficient on the required trees along Big Beaver. And lastly, we do know that they need to provide transparency calculations on all the elevations. This is the elevations that are being proposed. This is a view from Big Beaver. Again, that kind of looks like almost a wooden overhang structure. That's going to be the drop-off area to the building. This is a view of the backside and parking of the building. This is again from Troy Drive. And then lastly, this is a view at the hard corner of Big Beaver and Frankton, and the primary elevation that would be viewed from those 2 locations. So with all that being said, we are recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of those items noted with the conditions as we include in our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle from the Planning Commission? If not, we will give the applicant an opportunity to come up and present the project again, or any additional information they might have.
Thank you. I'm David Sawyer. I'm one of the developers of this project, and I'm an attorney here in Troy. Last time we were here, I gave you just a brief history of the property. I won't bore you all with that again. I know we have some new members, and to surmise, my father was here with me, and Mr. Garrett started collecting this property back in the early 1980s. We've had many opportunities to develop this parcel, but we felt and wanted something pretty special for it. And that is why we've chosen this Cooper's Hawk restaurant for this particular location. We wanted something that we felt was neighborhood friendly, that fit with the neighborhood. The Cooper's Hawk restaurant is a Napa-style tasting room, winery and restaurant. It closes at 9:30 Monday through Thursday, and 10:30 the kitchen closes at 9:30 Monday through Thursday, and 10:30 Friday, Saturday, 9 o'clock on Sundays. So the kitchen, people will finish eating after the kitchen closes about an hour. The bar closes an hour after the kitchen closes. So we felt this was a good fit for a neighborhood. It closes early, so it's not the kind of place you're going to have a lot of people leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning making noise. So we felt it was a good fit for the neighborhood. It's a family, I don't want to say it's a family-style restaurant, but it is a family-friendly restaurant. Whenever I've been there, I've seen quite a few families and children in the restaurant. It has a large menu, and compared to many of the other newer restaurants in Troy, it's fairly reasonably priced. I think the average plate price is less than, I said $28 last time, but it's less than that, isn't it? It's somewhat less than $28 is the average plate price. So it's I think more reasonable than some of the newer locations we have in Troy. The one, Dave, do you have that new one with the statue on it? Well, I did just want to point out one of the things we don't have here is, this was a placeholder statue for the public art that we have going in here. This is actually going to be and I wish I had a picture of it. I thought we were going to have it on these today, but it's a pretty large origami hawk. So it's going to be a metal hawk done in origami fashion. It's going to be pretty large, and it's done by an artist who originally is from the area. He lives in the Finger Lakes now. His name's Jay Seaman. It's a pretty great piece of art in my opinion. I've learned one thing over the years is that there's no accounting for taste, so yours may vary, but I really think it's a really cool piece of art and a great addition to the public art here in Troy. Jay has done a lot of large aviary statues as well as other animals. They generally tend to be out of stainless steel entirely, and he's done some for the Forestry Service, for public parks, and some really great projects. Specifically as to some of the issues raised, we think that this adds to the value of the properties on 16 Mile Road. This is a pretty valuable project. There's going to be probably $7 million plus put into this project. So it's a good project for Troy in terms of valuation on the street. Hopefully the tax assessor won't hear that. That's what I said, but that's the situation here. I have material boards, which I showed you last time. I'm happy to hand that around again. You've seen the elevations. I think the one issue, well, there was a couple issues that were raised last time by some of the board members, so I'd address those. I believe Mr. Krent had made a comment about the heights of the screening bushes around the parking area. So we took a look at that. They were listed at 30 inches. I know that the planning department is recommending that approval of this project, and I appreciate that. And they've made a couple comments, a couple caveats on that approval, and one of them is that they'd like to see the bushes be 42 inches. I would just point out that the grade between the parking lot and the planting height of the bushes is 10 inches. So there's essentially a berm between the parking lot height and the planting height. So the 30-inch bushes that we would put in at planting would wind up being 40 inches high from the parking grade where the headlights will be. And I'm sure that it'll have some growth between installation and by the time we open the restaurant. So, I'd ask that be considered when we consider the bush height, that we've got a 10-inch differentiation between the bush height and grade. But ultimately, we will do whatever, obviously, the planning department or planning this council desires. They've also raised the issue of the trees on 16 Mile Road. All those trees, including the trees on 16 Mile Road, are in fact on the site. So the trees that would be on 16 Mile Road have been placed on Frankton Street or on Troy Street, elsewhere along the building, or up and down those roads there. If you drive around Troy and some of the new restaurants, you'll see some of them do have trees out front and some of them do not. I don't see them in front of Stony River at this point. I don't see them in front of, I don't believe they have them in front of Granite City. I like trees. I want to have as many trees as I can, and I packed as many trees on this site as I can. But given that we have spent a lot of money on what I think is a really nice piece of art, and we have these transparencies, spent a good deal of money making half of this building something you can see into, and we have this nice outdoor patio. We would prefer not to block our signs, block what we like our architecture with trees laid out front. So we have placed them elsewhere on the site. If they're so inclined, we'd prefer to put them, kind of place them strategically, either on the ends or whatever, because we would like to show off our building. We'd like to show off our art. We're spending a lot of money to do that, and we'd like to show them. So we do have the trees on site. If there's any questions, I got a lot more information I could give, but time is of the essence, I think.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant by the Plan Commission?
I have one quick question.
Mr.
You
Rahman.
mentioned about the statue that is not already identified, right?
Pardon me?
The statue that the...
Yeah, so we've chosen the artist, and I believe we have a representative from Cooper's Hawk here, and I have a picture of, not a picture of it, but I have a rendering of it. And unfortunately, the one that got printed tonight had the old placeholder in it, but it's a large stainless steel hawk done in kind of an origami style. And if you Google the artist Jay Seaman, you can see a lot of his work. I think it's great. I mean, I love it. I like it, a lot better than the placeholder we had there, and we're spending a good deal of money on it. And I think it's great. He's originally from the area. He's a local artist, and like I said, he's done statues for airports and wildlife areas and government, and it's neat and something. I know we have this public art requirement, and I don't think we've seen a lot of exciting public art yet in Troy, and I like this one. I think it's something different.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Grant.
We've talked that there's no real access directly from the building to the parking lot for patrons to come into the facility. My question is, will there be valet parking so they can be dropped off at the front door?
There will be valet parking. And I understood that was an issue raised by Mr. Tagle at the time. And we've looked at it. We've looked at this building many, many ways to try and do different things with it. And we really felt that this was the best option for this building. People are going to know where they're going. You come into this building, you see where the entryway is, you see where people are going, you see the drop-off area. It does not, and we've seen this with a lot of restaurants, when people are parking on either side of the restaurant, you wind up with these entrances where people have to walk through the restaurant to get to the other side. This is very important to my tenant here. What's special about Cooper's Hawk and different about Cooper's Hawk is this tasting room, wine retail area that they have when you walk into the restaurant. It's really nice looking. It's got hundreds of bottles of wine on the wall, a beautiful tasting area, a nice retail area, a reception area, and an area where you can they display desserts and various things. So I'm sure many of you probably been to Vegas or been to Disneyland. The program there is that you enter and exit through the gift shop. And that's very important to my tenant here. It's been my observational experience that people are like water. They tend to take the path of least resistance. And if we put a door on the back of this restaurant that will necessarily have to go past the bathrooms and the kitchen, that is where people will go. That's where they'll go in, and that's where they'll go out. And they'll wind up having to traipse through the restaurant to come to reception, and they'll wind up going out that way. And what we want, and what my tenant wants, is for them to come in through the main entrance, enter through the gift shop, if you will, but really it's a beautiful wine tasting area. Have a free taste of their wine, and hopefully have a glass at dinner, maybe buy a bottle, maybe join the wine club. It's one of the great revenue generators for this restaurant, and that is why it's designed that way, and all Cooper's Hawks are designed that way, that the entry traffic and the exit traffic goes through the area where you can buy wine-related items, where you can taste the wine, where you can decide to sign up for the wine club or buy a bottle of wine or try it on the way in. So it's very important to them, and I think it's the most attractive presentation.
Okay, a follow-up on the valet. Those parking places along Troy Drive, adjacent or opposite the handicap near the front, are those for valet or are those public patrons?
We haven't determined yet what will be valet. Typically, I think you'll see valet move towards the rear.
Hopefully.
It's typically you park your valet and you park your employees in the rear. I wouldn't be surprised to see some access deal done for employee parking to open up a possibility, but it's not on the table at this time. We know we have enough parking under the ordinance.
Well, yeah, I know the parking, enough parking. It's just that I would like to see patron parking close to that front door that are not handicapped, but they're somewhat not as mobile as other people.
Yes. Typically, in my experience, that's not where they park their valet, and I think that would be... Yeah.
Okay.
They always put their valet in the back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Mr. Tagle.
Yeah, I'd like to have a couple questions on your landscape plan. The plan calls for a 6-foot-high screen fence, and it refers to a detail on the following sheet, and I look on that sheet, it's a brick wall. Now, I'm assuming that means we're getting a brick wall.
You know, actually, that's not my hope. I don't, you know.
There's a 6-inch.
Yeah, I personally, Mr. Tagle, I got to speak to this because Mr. Tagle, you can address that, David, but Mr. Tagle, I loathe those white pre-form brick walls that you see separating projects from residential. It's what you typically see. You see them because they're fairly inexpensive. I've actually discussed with the two neighbors who directly abut the property what kind of fence we'd like to see in there. And we're talking, at this juncture, we're talking about a really nice decorative wood fence.
Well, you have to understand what you've submitted to us is not a precast concrete wall with a brick embossment.
Okay.
It's a brick masonry wall with individual bricks.
You want to look at that?
Yeah, I think that's a holdover from, I apologize, Dave Hunter from PEA. That was a holdover from a wall that we had on the plans earlier in the project. So we removed that wall, and there should be a detail for a 6-foot-high wood fence on the plans, which we could work through with.
Yeah, I think before I would, if not by this body, I think this should be handled administratively. We need to see what this wood wall is going to be.
I think we would agree to we would agree to that condition as part of the approval.
Absolutely would agree to that condition. I want a nice wall, and specifically I want a wall that's agreeable to one of the residents who I spoke with directly. He's going to be the one most impacted by it. And we've certainly screened on both sides of it for him, but he's indicated a preference, and we discussed with him the fact that we would work with him for a wall that was mutually acceptable. But I understand your concern, Mr. Tagle, and we're agreeable to having that be something that was acceptable.
All right. Next question, if I could. You show the screen wall some dimension off of your property line, inboard or from your property. Who's going to maintain that bit of the property, your property, that is outside of that 6-foot-high screen wall, and how would you access it without going over other people's property?
Well, I'd access it without going over other people's property, because in front of wherever that wall is on the city line would in fact be my property. So that would be how I'd be accessing it. I haven't, kind of discussed the maintenance of the backside of that specifically with the neighbors. The reason that we moved that wall in was part of my discussions with the neighbors. So originally, and I guess I don't want to use the word by right, but for this purpose I will, that to the extent we're approved, I'd be entitled to put the wall on the property line.
Well, and that's true, but as a body here, we need to be concerned with
I understand.
how we're going to maintain that. That's really not even visible from your side of the wall.
It's not, and I've screened it so we discussed various options for what we could do. We could put the wall up on the property line, we could put the wall back 3 feet, we could plant things on that side of the wall, we could not plant things on that side of the wall, and I worked with both neighbors extensively to discuss how we would do that, what we would do, what the fence would look like, what the trees would look like. So in answer to your question is, to the extent that the wall stops short of the street, or even if it ran to the street, which it doesn't, you just go around the wall to get access to that property, and it essentially is still my property. I'm assuming we will maintain it unless I, work out some other maintenance agreement with them and they decide to maintain it. But if they're not, it's going to fall on me to do it, and that's what we're going to do.
All right. And lastly, the west property line that jogs in off of Troy, you show the fence right along your property line, and there's an existing tree there, and that tree is to remain, but I don't know how you'll install that fence without killing the roots of the tree.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that tree. How that tree, that tree should go. Okay, that tree should go, but I believe we just jog the fence around it, don't we?
Yeah, we're going to have to either jog the fence
or we leave it open
or
at the tree line.
open at the tree line.
Yeah, so I've discussed that with the neighbors. There's plenty of screening along there, I believe, from my recollection of looking at the plan, to leave the fence line open there. That tree, in my view, is really that neighbor's tree and not my tree. They've called it on my property because it essentially grows right into the fence that is there right now. If there's 2 inches of that tree on my property, I'd be surprised, but when they counted it, they called it my tree, and I said, all right, fine, call it my tree, and if it's not my tree, I can't cut it down anyway. I'd be willing to take that tree down if the neighbor was so inclined. I think that increases the number of trees I have to put on the property. I don't know if I already meet the requirement to take that tree down or not, but right now the plan would be to leave it open around that tree so that we don't impact the roots. But it is not a tall and particularly attractive tree if you look at it.
It looks fairly large relative
Yeah.
to everyone else, everything else.
Yeah.
Question, what is the screening requirement to the adjacent property from a parking lot?
The screening requirement is either the initial requirement is a wall. The Planning Commission has the authority to relieve the requirement for a wall and do landscaping and/or a fence instead.
So that would have to be part of the recommendation, that we would accept a fence in lieu of a wall, or landscaping in lieu of a wall?
Correct. Mr. Tagle, I'll be frank with you. The plans I reviewed showed a fence, and the plans in the packet are a fence.
Right.
So I'm not sure where the issue of the wall came from.
Are you talking about the wall that's detailed on the following sheet? Is that, or the
That
wall
appears to be a knee wall for screening of parking, correct? It's not the walls along the borderline that we're talking about.
I think you have a landscape plan, and if you want the details in your packet there.
Well, Ben, actually, I've moved on from the wall to the fence. The developer says he wants to put a fence. He says he's worked out all the details. My thought is, he's need to show you those details before.
The details are in the packet.
Wood wall details?
The wood fence details in the packet. It's on sheet C-51.1.
What is that?
It's on sheet C-5.1.
Okay. So then, does that accommodate the tree? And that's where my question really came, is what happens when that fence gets into the drip line of that tree? And is it required that there has to be some screening? Now, if you're saying it can be landscaping, it sounds like the fence can be interrupted.
So the landscape plan shows landscaping. Mr. Zavon, can you pull up the landscape plan? It's in the packet on page 27. Actually 31. So, Mr. Tagle, I'll use my little red dot up here if you can't see. The fence basically is right in the middle of this rather dense landscaping. There's proposed evergreen landscaping on both sides of this fence. I think the tree you're talking about is this tree in this location, correct?
No,
It's that one, the big one there to your left there, Ben?
Okay, this one.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle, that's identified to preserve, to stay. If it is damaged, dead, or removed as part of construction, they were required to be mitigated in accordance with what the ordinance requires. So
well, and again, if it's on their property line.
Well, it's
according to the drawing, it's not necessarily on their property line, but I know we're splitting hairs here. My concern is they show a fence up against an existing tree, and that doesn't work. And again, it's an item that it should be clarified at the minimum level through the administrative process. But what they've shown on the drawing does not work.
Okay. The fence does not break on the plan there?
Pardon me?
The fence doesn't break for the tree on the plan? I think it doesn't it, David?
Well, that's the problem. The fence does actually, we were supposed to put the fence around the half circle that we showed as radius that's out of the drip line of the tree, or very close to the edge of the drip line.
Yeah, I think this was the property line, and that's the fence
that
line.
Was
so
supposed to be
that
the
dash line is the fence.
We will clarify that with staff and make sure that we address that.
All right. And now that Mr. Carlisle's pointed out the wood fence detail, there looks like there's a front and a back to the fence. One side has all the vertical boards on it, and the back side has the support of the vertical boards. Which is the back side relative to the neighbor and your property? And I might also suggest maybe put two front sides on it.
I don't mean to complicate matters, Mr. Tagle, but that's not the fence I'm putting up, okay? I'm going to put up a nicer fence than that. So if that's the minimum, we'll put two front sides on it if that's a requirement. The fence I intend to put up is going to look a lot better than that one.
Mr. Sawyer, this is the fence that was in the plan that we reviewed.
I understand.
We'll work with staff to address that comment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tagle. Mr. Salva, Mr. Carlisle, are you willing to work with the applicant on this fence issue and resolve the details, and whatever submission they will make on the revision, we'll do that administratively? Okay.
And just to remind you, the Planning Commissioner's role in this item is as a recommendation body. Ultimately has to go to City Council for approval.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And my suggestion is that all of these issues that we're pointing out need to be in the final submission to City Council before, with your conditional rezoning, because that's what gets approved. What gets approved is what gets built. Whatever. So if this isn't what you intend to build, better change it before it gets to City Council.
Does that mean that we need to have the actual verbiage in there tonight on what we're voting on? Or can the changes be made administratively and
well, this is a conditional
resolution?
Rezoning, so it's kind of a hybrid at this point. It needs,
okay.
When I do the conditional rezoning agreement, all of these, the landscape plan, the site plan, those become part of the conditional rezoning agreement. So whatever's in that final packet that goes to City Council is what they're agreeing to build.
So the additional changes or conditions
we should put it in the
beyond the resolution that we're voting on tonight can be added and submitted to council that we'll never get to see again. Is that?
Right.
Okay. Mr. Faison.
A question for you, Brent, or Ben. The trees that are required on Big Beaver, how many are those?
It's 8, right? I believe it's 8.
It sounds about right. Eight trees based on the distance of the length of Big Beaver, correct? Yes.
Okay. And then on the site plan, there are none?
I'll have to verify that based on what Mr. Sawyer said. It appears he indicates that those 8 trees have been placed in other locations on the site. He mentions the fact that there are other restaurants, including ones that have been built, that the trees haven't been put on Big Beaver. I'm not aware of the Planning Commission ever granting a waiver on those, so I'd have to go back and look at that. The Planning Commission does have the authority to, if they want to give relief and put them on elsewhere on the site, they have the authority to do that. I'm just not aware if it's happened in the Planning Commission that I can remember, and I don't know if anyone on the Planning Commission remembers specifically allowing that waiver for other site plans, but I'm not aware of that.
Thank you.
So is that item still something that is outstanding that needs to be addressed administratively that we're not addressing tonight either?
Our recommendation is the applicant put the trees on Big Beaver where they're supposed to be by ordinance.
Okay.
And if the Planning Commission wants to recommend that they put them elsewhere on the site, that should be that motion should be amended in your actual resolution to state that.
Okay. So at this point, we haven't had too much of a discussion on those trees being relocated from Big Beaver to anywhere else on the property. As you mentioned.
Correct, just the applicant.
At this point, the trees should be at the Big Beaver right-of-way line, or?
That's our recommendation.
Okay.
That's what the ordinance requires, that's our recommendation.
Mr. Quinn.
I just want to follow up on those trees along Big Beaver. I've seen situations on Big Beaver where those trees block signs and building addresses. So who's going to make sure that once these trees are planted, that they don't block things that people want to see through those trees. In other words, they're not along Big Beaver. Matter of fact, quite a few of the trees, you can't even walk on the sidewalk because you get hit by branches. You have to duck to walk down the sidewalk. So I'm just throwing these things out there as, yes, it's a great ordinance, I think, to have the trees, but who maintains it so that there's visibility on the business sign? And the reason I say visibility on the business sign is so important is because you don't want people driving, looking for it, and then all of a sudden seeing the sign between the trees and say, oh my gosh, slam on the brakes, we got to turn right now. So that's the kind of, you need, you're going 45 miles an hour on that street. I want to make sure it's a safe entrance to that restaurant, and that people see the signage of the restaurant well before they get to it. And then, of course, it shouldn't block their address on the building either.
Mr. Savana.
So a couple things. So we do recommend they place the trees on Big Beaver. Having said that, this is a unique site. It's got three fronts, 3 street frontages. So it's a challenging site. So we recognize that. The Zoning Board of Appeals recognized that when he granted the variances that they're required based on the fact that it's got 3 sides. The planning consultant, Ben and I will sleep just fine if the Planning Commission decides that it's appropriate to plant those trees elsewhere on the site. The intent is to have a line of trees along Big Beaver, but every site is different, and when the zoning ordinance update was crafted in 2011, we actually specifically talked about flexibility in landscaping. That's when we talked about the buffers. We used to have just a wall. Now we have landscaping, a combination of landscaping, wall, fence, berm, etc. So we wanted to give the Planning Commission flexibility. To answer Mr. Krent's concern about blocking views, etc. So the PEA has a landscape architect or landscape architects on staff. There's a list of species in our zoning ordinance. It's a pretty thorough list. Different types of characteristics of trees. There's columnar trees. There's different deciduous trees that have they can plant them at various heights to get above any signage that you don't want to block, etc. So there are ways to design plantings so that they don't obstruct. I'm guessing if it does obstruct the building or it does obstruct a sign, that Cooper's Hawk is going to want to trim the trees so that it doesn't obstruct those things. So it's a very long-winded answer.
No, good answer.
Just to piggyback on what you said, Mr. Sabanan, I think that site has enough frontage on Big Beaver to actually accommodate, to allow that flexibility for the applicant to place some trees, appropriate trees along Big Beaver. They don't have to all be, they don't have to be actually spread out. They can actually, I'm sure their landscape architect can select the appropriate location and density and species of trees where they need to be placed. So, any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, seeing Ms. Fowler.
So when you were talking about the 42 inches that you wanted to have between the headlights and the residents, Mr. Savitt, were you taking into account the fact it was on a 10-inch berm?
Yes, but 30 plus 10 is still only 40. So
okay, but you weren't suggesting 42 on top of the 10 inches.
The intent is that whatever method is used to screen there be at least 42 inches at planting so that there's immediate relief from headlight glare in those houses across the street.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Thank you. I think we're good. So this is not a public hearing, but we will open it up to public comments. If there is anyone in the audience, any of the residents especially, that want to make comments or that weren't here at the last meeting that would like to speak on this item, you may come forward at this time. Or even if you were here, you have another opportunity to speak if you like.
Hi, my name is Michael Downs, and I live on Troy Street. I'm the adjacent property owner to the development here. And I guess one of the things that was not brought up was this other entrance on the north side into the parking lot, and no accommodation off of Frankton for an entrance in and out. I don't know if that was looked at or considered. I don't know if, I know I'm supposed to address you and not him, but I heard somebody, one of my neighbors had told me that a new plan was submitted with that entrance off of Frankton added and the north entrance deleted. So I don't know if that's a consideration. As far as the bushes at 42 inches, are they going to be deciduous or evergreen? If they're deciduous, then they're useless in winter, right? So I think they should be evergreen. And I guess the other thing is, what we're worried about is the traffic coming in to the neighborhood and how this is going to impact the neighborhood. We've got 20 kids that live on Troy Street alone, and our concern is their safety and the traffic that's going to be coming in and out of Troy Street and up and down Heartland. You know, if we can get one entrance deleted and put on another street and have signs saying turn left only or turn right only or whatever the situation is, to exit out onto Big Beaver instead of exiting into the neighborhood, I think should be considered. I think it should be considered for Renaissance Spa, or Spa Renaissance there too. So we're worried about the safety, and we're worried about the impact on the neighborhood, you know. So that's what we would like you to consider and when you're thinking about this.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Savana, would you like to shed some light on that issue?
So the issue of, there's two, the drawing you see on the screen here is two curb cuts on Troy, 0 on Frankton. The issue was raised by some residents. It was discussed by Planning Commission. You know, what's the best situation? So what we asked the applicant's engineer to do was submit a sketch to staff to look at with eliminating the northerly curb cut on Troy and putting a curb cut on Frankton. Let our city engineer and consultant look at it and see if there's a scientific reason for, you know, one versus the other. And basically what it boiled down to was it's a wash. You know, choose your option. You can, there's merit for spreading it out. There's merit for having two on Troy with a light providing access to it. So it was, there wasn't a scientific reason to prefer one over the other. So there was not a consensus of the Planning Commission to submit Frankton, 1 on Frankton versus 0 on Frankton. If the Planning Commission and or City Council decide that it's a better option to have one curb cut on each road, the engineer can make the change and we'll still have the same number of trees, the same percentage of landscaping, etc. It's a fairly simple revision, but at this time this is what has been submitted for consideration. But to be clear, there's not a scientific reason in terms of like safety and etc. That would favor one over the other.
Thank you, Mr. Savana. So my thought on that is, if the consultant actually said it's a wash, there's no scientific information, there's no scientific data to really give preference of one design over another. But we do have the one resident who actually lived next to this property, whose property is adjacent to this property, who is actually requesting that the other option be considered. Is that something that, even though the consultant did not make that recommendation either way, should that be something that we should consider because the one resident that abuts this property is requesting that?
If a majority of the Planning Commission believes that that's the right thing to do based on public comment, then that can be, that design consideration can be in your motion for the City Council to consider eliminating the northern curb cut and having a curb cut instead on Frankton.
Sure. Any other thoughts from the planning commissioners on this item, on curb cuts, Mr. Krantz?
You know, I like the comments you made at the last meeting talking about people waiting because, okay, on Troy you've got a traffic light, on Frankton you don't. And you were indicating that, again, I can't remember your exact words, that it would...
redistribute.
Yeah, it would distribute the traffic better. I kind of liked your thoughts on that. I would like to actually, because I'm concerned about the traffic impact on Troy Street, to just lessen it at any that we can. I would like to see some on Frankton. So I would be in favor of having a drive out onto Frankton and eliminate the northern curb cut on Troy Street.
Mr. Krantz, if I could address that, if it's appropriate. I actually have a drawing of it. So I have discussed with the neighbors who are most impacted by this northern exit, or northern entrance and exit on Troy Street. I've met with them on numerous occasions, and it is really the only opposition that they've expressed to the project. And my understanding is that they're not opposed to the project, they're opposed to that particular entrance. So we've actually engineered it, designed it, looked at it, and we have no problem with it from our perspective. Like the planning department, like the way others have looked at it, we don't know that scientifically it matters. I have my own personal preference. You know, from my perspective, I think that one thing about it is that as people come to this restaurant, they will turn down Frankton. And there won't be an entrance on Frankton. And so they'll probably go around the block, or they'll turn around and come back out. So that's one argument in favor of Frankton, the way I look at it. The only issue negatively towards Frankton is that you will hit the next turnaround to come out that way, and you'll go across Big Beaver Road and brake to get into Frankton Street. So that's the situation. With coming out this way, you have to go further. You have to go, I believe, past 16 Mile Road to hit the turnaround to go west. Or, east.
Past Livernois?
What? No, Mike, I'm saying I think if you come out just Troy Street, you've got to go past the light to turn around, right? Mike's the immediate neighbor to the north, and we've got a good relationship, I think. So, this one, if you come out Frankton Street, you can actually hit the turnaround before you get to the light at 16 Mile Road to head east. So if the planning committee was inclined to suggest that this plan be changed to include an exit on Frankton Street and eliminate the one off of Troy Street, we're more than prepared to do it. We've engineered it. We've looked at it. Do we lose one parking space, David? If we lose one parking space, we're still within the ordinance.
I'd be in favor of that.
I would be in favor of that as well. I think without a formal traffic study, we don't have any numbers to back up either one of the options, but just intuitively, somehow that option makes more sense in terms of access, even in terms of access for customers, and also from distribution of traffic coming out of that location. So I'd be in favor of that option. Any other thoughts by Mr. Tagle?
Yeah, I like the neighbor's comment about the left turn and right turn only, or left turn only if you're coming out just on Troy. I think that would be important to deter people from driving through the neighborhood to get back to Livernois or wherever they may be going. So I think that should be a condition, that there should be a no left turn or a no right turn depending on where the drives are, so that prevents traffic from going back into the neighborhood.
Mr. Salvadan, is that something that the signage on that would be in the city right away to prevent a right turn onto Troy going northbound, or will that signage have to be on the private property, just directing vehicles actually make a left on Troy and not make a right?
It's a good question. I've seen these for other developments. It's something we could certainly look at. I don't know if it really matters where the placement of the sign is, but if it's a design consideration, we can certainly add it.
I think that's a good suggestion, even though it's usually hard to enforce. I mean, even though it's there, it's hard to enforce, but at least it might deter a certain percentage of the vehicles from making that right turn and going through the neighborhood to the north. So
I believe that the city engineer would tell you that it is difficult to enforce.
we can, Mr. Tagle, I guess we can have that as one of the.
Yeah, I think for the law-abiding citizens, they'll, you know, I mean, come on.
And I'd say that's the majority of the population here.
Yes, Mr.
I just had a question on the entrances. So are we talking about changing the site plan to have remove the northbound entrance, the northern entrance on Troy, and put an entrance on Frankton? Or are we saying that will be a consideration?
Can I jump in here? Because, you know, these conditional rezonings make me nervous. I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sawyer, that you're actually offering, as part of your condition for this conditional rezoning, to swap the site plan that was submitted for the plan that has the driveway removed from the northern driveway on Troy Street and adding the Frankton. Is that what you're offering?
If they were inclined to recommend that, we're prepared to do.
See, this is a conditional rezoning,
right.
So the offer needs to come, that needs to flow from, we can't put conditions on what you're.
I understand. I can do it either way, so I would say it's whichever is preferred, if that's acceptable to you. I mean, I just don't have a preference for it. I know that that's what the neighbors would prefer, and I want to be a good neighbor, and that's why I, propose this to accommodate them and prepared for it to accommodate them. I also told them if, for whatever reason, the planning department, the city was not inclined to move that exit, that I'd put landscaping in the front yard to block the headlights. I just want to be a good neighbor to everybody, and so we're prepared to do what is best for the community.
So I think we heard the applicant offer that condition correctly.
Right, so I guess my suggestion again is when this final submission goes to City Council that the, I'm looking at C-2.0 needs to be swapped out for the revised plans. So I'm going to make a note of that.
Okay.
That should be reflected on all the plans.
Any other questions from Planning Commission at this point? Comments, thoughts, or are we ready for resolution on this with additional items for consideration? Yes, Hemant.
How many lights will be placed around that area?
How many
lights?
Parking lot lights. Mr. Carlisle, do you have that information at this point?
SL 1.1.
Parking lot lights?
There's a photometric plan, sheet SL 1.1.
I believe there are going to be 10 parking lot poles, lights on poles within the site itself.
Okay, thank you.
If we have no more questions or comments, Mr. Tagle, would you like to take a stab at it with additional comments?
Let me get to the resolution here.
Do we need to discuss the fact that it means special use? Because the City Council's not going to review it.
It was my recommendation. It got pulled out. You should.
All right. All right, resolved that the Planning Commission hereby recommends to City Council that the R1E to BB conditional rezoning request, which incorporates preliminary site plan approval as per section 16.04 of the City of Troy zoning ordinance located on the north side of Big Beaver between Troy and Frankton within section 22, be granted for the following reasons. Number one, the request complies with the master plan. Number two, the form-based district would permit greater flexibility in use and development of the property. Number three, the conditions offered by the applicant reasonably protect the adjacent properties. Number four, the rezoning would be compatible with surrounding zoning and land use. Number five, the site can be adequately served with municipal water and sewer. Number six, the development of the property should not unreasonably impact adjacent properties. Be it further resolved that the Planning Commission recommends that the following site plan design considerations. Number one, ensure that all shrubs for parking lot screening along Troy Street and Franklin Street Drive are a minimum of 42 inches at the time of planting. Provide required street trees on Big Beaver as reviewed by the staff prior to submission to City Council. Number three, provide transparency calculations for all elevations. Number four, provide revised details for the fencing around the wood fence around the property. Number five, develop some details that where the fence interferes or is in close proximity to an existing large tree on the northwest corner of the property. Is there anything else?
The street.
Oh, the street. Yeah,
eliminate.
Yeah. Eliminate the northernmost entrance-exit drive on Troy Street and add a new entrance-exit drive on Frankton Street. And at both entrances, install signage that would direct traffic to turn toward Big Beaver and not into the subdivision.
Mr. Sabina.
Could I have the motion maker consider the following? That this application incorporates not only preliminary site plan approval, but also special use approval. Can we clarify that in the resolution? Also, can we, the first design consideration, can we clarify that that all shrubs be of a coniferous species, and that be a minimum of 42 inches above parking lot grade at time of planting? So that would incorporate not only the height of the plant, but also any burning that would go in.
On your third point, let me ask you: does our ordinance define where plantings are measured from as far as their height? I mean, does it say measured at the base of the plant or base of the tree?
I guess what I'm looking for is during final engineering, when we get down to the accurate, the berm and the nitty gritty, that we want to have flexibility to be fair to get to 42 inches with the combination of the berm and the plant, so that, I mean, the really detailed, the details on the berm really aren't there yet. There'll be more details at final, and at that point we can ensure that they're 42 inches. And I want to be fair by allowing the incorporation of the berm with that measured from the grade of the parking lot, which is where the tire of the vehicle will be. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
But again, if my question back to you, and I don't have a problem with that, but my question is that contrary to how our ordinance defined measuring shrubbery? That's all I really was asking. When we say, plants have to be a certain height, what does the ordinance say to how do you measure that? And maybe it doesn't address it.
It would be from grade, measuring the height of plants. So this specifically incorporates the height of the berm from the parking lot, so that we get to that 42 inches.
I can accept all three of your proposed modifications. Now I don't have to repeat them.
Moved by Mr. Tagle and seconded by Mr. Krent. Any further comments? Roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson? I'm sorry, Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abahidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Motion passes, and it is going to the City Council for final approval. Moving on to item number 6 on the agenda. Actually, we will take a 5-minute break and have Mr. Hudson rejoin us.
Want me to go, Mr.
Item number 6, preliminary site plan review, file number SPJP. Oh, I don't think we're on yet. Okay. Item number 6 on the agenda, preliminary site plan review, file number SPJPLN 2018-0027, Beaumont parking lot expansion, west side of DeQuinder, south of South Boulevard, 44201 DeQuinder, Section 1, Zone CF, Community Facility, Zoning District. Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you and good evening. The second item before you tonight is a proposed parking lot expansion and maintenance yard, maintenance building in a salt dome for the Beaumont Hospital located on DeQuinder. You can see outlined in my graphic on the screen that the proposed parking lot expansions are those areas outlined in yellow. There is 2 primary ones more on the southern end of the site and a smaller, thinner one on the northern end of the site. And the maintenance yard and maintenance buildings are within that red box adjacent to that larger parking expansion area. The parking expansion is north of the existing main parking area on that campus, and again, it's adjacent to both the detention pond on the facility as well as the detention pond at the golf course itself. In total, the applicant is seeking approval to add a total of 507 parking spaces in addition to the maintenance yard. As a result of the parking lot expansion, the maintenance building, there will be approximately 429 protected trees will be removed. In their application, the applicant did provide a justification for the parking. They did a parking study in 2017. At that time, it was noted that there is a current deficit of approximately 596 employee and physician spaces on their 2 campuses combined. They have both a west and an east campus. There is an additional parking area on the east campus that that overflows and allows people to cross the street to use their west campus. There is additional overflow parking on the City of Troy's park site that they also do compensate the city to have overflow parking in that location. If you just consider the west campus alone, the study did note that there's a deficiency of almost 1,100 parking spaces. And they do have a master plan to make some improvements to the hospital itself, and so the deficiency increases with the increase in building at the hospital site itself. In addition, they do note that having convenient patient and visitor parking is a key to their success in providing a service to the community. With regards to the site plan, this graphic shows the 2 main parking areas that are being proposed. You'll note that the maintenance shed that I highlighted in red is along the western property line. It's approximately 100 feet by 220 feet. It will maintain a maintenance building, a salt dome, fuel trucks, trash enclosure, equipment, etc. They propose to screen it with an 8-foot tall chain link fence and screen with 28-foot tall evergreen trees. I will note that there is an existing maintenance yard on the facility that is located in the area where they're putting their proposed parking expansion. That would be removed and replaced with this new maintenance yard. With regards to tree mitigation, as I noted, the site does have significant tree cover and includes a significant amount of red maple, sugar maples, and beech trees. In total, the applicants identified that 311 woodland trees were removed, 118 landmark trees will be removed. However, 137 woodland trees will be preserved and 40 landmark trees will be preserved. Those locations of the preserved trees are outlined in red. We do note that there should be a conservation easement or some other means to protect those trees that are identified for preservation as required by the ordinance. The applicant has submitted elevations for the Planning Commission to consider. The property, the maintenance building above you is approximately 18 feet in 18 feet in height, and it will have pre-finished metal panels. The salt dome is approximately 25 feet in height. It will be a concrete block base with a stretched fabric material covering it. In summary, we are recommending approval with the site plan, provided the applicant protect the trees identified with conservation easement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle at this time? No questions. I see the applicant is here. You may come forward and present the project and any other information you want to provide.
Sure. Thank you. Jake Meadows. I'm with Beaumont Hospital. As the hospital continues to grow at Troy, challenge of parking still remains. Staff and physician parking are a daily challenge for the campus and our security team, trying to get everyone landed into a spot that's shown in the results of the 2017 study that we completed that was included in the application. In general, we try to focus our patients and visitors into the deck. That's the quickest way into the hospital. They can also use valet. This leaves the balance of the surface lots on the east and west campuses that you saw in the images there for staff and physicians to park on. In addition, we also are still utilizing Flynn Park as mentioned as well, roughly 150 cars parked there. With that, we've reached a point where we're in need of additional parking on campus, not only to handle the current demand, but also future growth. We have roughly 45,000 square feet of vacant shelf space on 3 floors of the hospital right now. That would accommodate anywhere from 36 to 46 inpatient beds, depending on the floor plan designed for those associated shelf spaces. So with that is going to come additional patients, visitors, and staff. As stated in the application, a new surface lot is our first step in helping to accommodate that demand, and we need a next move, if you will, in regards to parking. We realize the impact of the new surface lot will have on the site and the trees on site. We've worked with PEA to hopefully develop a green approach towards that with bioswales included in the lot for stormwater management. Hopefully that's seen as environmentally friendly approach. We do have a previous permit with the state of Michigan DEQ for wetlands in that area that were mitigated in 2006 as part of our master plan effort then. They're allowing us, the initial feedback we're getting from them is that they're allowing us to reinstate that permit with this effort to completely remove those wetlands as they have not been removed as part of the original permit. With this effort, as mentioned, we're also looking to relocate our grounds building, our salt dome, and our fuel tanks, get them out off the front drive, if you will, or the loop road of the hospital, back at the back end of the campus, and try to get the parking as close to the hospital as possible. We've received staff feedback that, we want a safe place to land and park and walk into the facility. Why is the grounds building closer to, the facility than our parking lot? So, with that, we're prepared to answer any questions you may have and provide any other information you need.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Runner. Just want to mention that my wife works for Beaumont Hospital, so if you want me to, leave or recuse, I don't know if it's matter.
Any thoughts on that, Mr. Savanat?
Could you pull your microphone a little bit closer?
So I'm saying that my wife works for Beaumont Hospital, and I'm just wondering if I need to recuse myself from this discussion. Or
In what capacity?
She's a doctor. She's a physician.
I don't think you have any fiscal reason to, but if you'd like to put it to a vote of the members of Planning Commission to determine whether or not you need to recuse, that's up to you, and that's up to Planning Commission.
Any?
I have no objection.
I have no objection.
I have no objection either.
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, thanks.
But thank you for disclosing. That's important for you to disclose those things. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Any questions for the applicant at this time? Mr. Tagle.
Not so much a question, but just a comment. Beaumont has always been a great asset to this city, and you've done some very nice work out on this campus. And quite honestly, I'm so disappointed in this building. I know it's a maintenance building, but it really looks like not a lot of thought was put into this. We go put up a metal building, it's just disappointing. You guys have set the bar pretty high in what you often do, and to present this to us, it's for me, it is well below what I would expect from Beaumont.
Any other questions for the applicant? Did you mention that the underground fuel tanks are being relocated as well?
Just the above ground fuel for our maintenance vehicles, our lab deliveries, they're above ground fuel storage. None of our underground fuel storage associated with the generators is relocating with this effort.
No more questions for the applicant? Thank you. I guess we're good. So this is not a public hearing, but we will open it up to anyone in the audience that actually wishes to speak on this item on the agenda. So if you want to speak, please come forward at this time and sign in and introduce yourself in your relationship of your property to the hospital.
My name is Mary Bogish. I'm not a current resident of Troy. I used to be. I know this area intimately, not so specifically behind Troy Beaumont, but across the lake, as you would, of the golf course. I was instrumental in getting a lot of Section 1 property preserved because of the high environmental value of it and the species that are there, both plant and animal. And when I look at the number of trees that this site is going to cut down, the species use those trees too. I think just in this time when we are having everything disappear of natural resources in Troy, that every effort should be made to not continue to cut down trees that give us oxygen, that help the planet, that help our health, being next to a hospital facility in particular. I don't agree with, like you said, the maintenance building and the closeness of these structures and parking lots right to the water parts that do have flow into downstream areas. So I just wish that they wouldn't build any of these parking lots. That's my opinion. And thank you for listening. I just was driving by and I didn't even plan to come here, but I'm glad I did, and I hope you'll consider what I've said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did I say my name?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. If there are no other comments or questions for the applicant, maybe we're ready for resolution.
Sure.
Mr. Grant.
Resolved that preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed Beaumont parking lot expansion located on the west side of DeQuinder and south of South Boulevard, 44201 DeQuinder, Section 1, within the CF Community Facility District be granted subject to the following. Number 1, protect trees identified for preservation with conservation easement.
Do they have one more comment? I'm sorry. Can you hold on for a second? Is that the only item? Yeah, that's the
There's only one item
there.
there that's been.
So we got a motion by Mr. Krant. Can we get a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Faison. Any comments? Any other questions before we take a vote on this item?
The only comment I would make is that I hope, just to reiterate what Mr. Tagle said, I hope Beaumont considers a better materials for their maintenance building. I mean, we can't dictate that from here, but
Sure.
I think it's a very valid comment.
Before we take the vote, the applicant wants another opportunity to speak. We have consensus to allow the applicant to speak at this time. Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
I'm sorry for goofing up the rotation there. Just a comment on the conservation easement. We are willing to do that. The only item that we would bring up is, one, if development results in additional stormwater retention being needed and the pond needing to grow again, we would like to look at that easement at that time. We would replace trees to accommodate that, but that would be the only item, along with if the property line should change. There's no intentions of expanding into the golf course or purchasing that property, but we land something in an easement and now it's permanent. If the property line were to change, we'd like to be able to grow the campus in some form or fashion. So if that verbiage around those two items could be worked into an easement, we're certainly for that. And again, we would be all for replacing any trees that would be removed with those efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We got a motion by Mr. Krent, seconded by Mr. Faison at this point. I think we're ready for roll call. Ms. Herneke.
Mr. Hudson?
This motion does not include the comments made by Beaumont just now, does it?
It does not.
Does not.
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item number 7 on the agenda, preliminary site plan review, file number SPJPLN 2018-0026, Imperium Troy Development, east side of Crooks, south of Wilshire, 911 Wilshire, Section 21, Zone BB, Big Beaver Zoning District. Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you. Last item tonight before you is a proposed site plan to develop the front portion of the old Cruise and Mirror site on Wilshire and Crooks. The existing site is occupied by a surface parking lot in the former, now demolished building at the rear of the site. A little background on the development. The building will front on Crooks as well as Wilshire. Parking will be in the rear. Site access will not be off of Crooks, but it'll be off of a outlet on Wilshire, as well as a cross access to the development to the south, which is the 888 building. It's the location of where the Seasons 52 and the Yard House restaurant are located. Again, there will be no access off of Crooks Road. The site plan is in front of you. It includes a 1-story, 4-unit, 17 or 18,000 square foot retail building. We do know that the largest tenant is the southernmost tenant and is actually a Charles Schwab building. As required by ordinance, the building is set back 10 feet from Crooks and 23 feet from Wilshire, so it meets all the dimensional requirements of the Big Beaver form-based district. With regards to parking, the applicant has provided 149 spaces, which meets the ordinance requirement. We do note that the parking is bifurcated by the main drive aisle that connects the site and Wilshire. As part of our review, we did note that there should be some form of pedestrian crossing from the 2 parking lots across the main drive aisle. Whether that be 1 or 2, that's up for discussion for the Planning Commission, but we do note there should be some protected pedestrian crossing in this location. In addition, we note that there is parking that fronts on Wilshire, and as a requirement of ordinance, that needs to be landscaped or screened. So that is also a condition of what we are recommending for the development. With regards to pedestrian improvements, we do note that there are some pedestrian improvements that we are recommending approval of. The first is the applicant is required to actually increase the sidewalk on Crooks to 8 feet in width. That's a requirement for all major mile roads in the city of Troy. In addition, we do note that there is not a sidewalk on the southern end of the Charles Schwab building to get from the Crooks Road sidewalk into the parking lot area of the site. So we are asking that they add a sidewalk along that southern end of the building. In addition, as I noted, we are requesting they add pedestrian crossings within the parking lot itself. With regards to landscaping, in the Big Beaver form-based district, you're required to have 15% landscaping. They are providing 13% landscaping, so we're going to be required to add either some decorative paving to meet the site plan requirements, or add some other form of landscaping to increase that to 15%. In addition, we do note they are deficient of 4 trees along Crooks Road, so that's another condition of approval. The elevation is in front of you. This is the elevation that would be facing Crooks Road. It's a mix of materials including stone, a composite, laminate, glass, metal, etc. The elevation on top is the elevation that you would see from the parking lot. The northern elevation is that you'd see from Wilshire, and the southern elevation is the Charles Schwab elevation on the south end of the site. The last elevation is a rendering of the site from Crooks. One issue that we want to highlight is that there is an ordinance requirement that there be access to the building from the main road, which would be Crooks Road in this case. We note that all the other tenant spaces do have direct access from Crooks Road. However, you can see in this Charles Schwab there is no direct door or connection to the Charles Schwab entrance from Crooks Road. So the applicant is going to be required to either provide a connection to that front from Crooks and or provide an easy access from the Crooks Road sidewalk to the entrance in some form or fashion. So again, those are a condition of recommendation of our approval. So with all that being said, we are recommending site plan approval with the conditions as noted above. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions from the Planning Commission? Mr. Tagle.
Do we have authority to waive the entrance off of Crooks for the Schwab portion of the building, or is that something that has?
We do. We've handled it with the Planning Commission. There's been 2 instances that I can think of off the top of mind where there were challenges meeting that requirement. One was actually with the competitor of Charles Schwab. It was with Fidelity, where we allowed them to strengthen the connection beside the building, like you saw on this diagram. Another was Seasons 52. Thank you. Okay. We allowed them to again strengthen the sidewalk area and make it very attractive and logical and intuitive that was how you get to the entryway.
Yeah, looking at the architecture of the building and then looking at the layout, I can see why they've not shown an entrance, and I personally don't know that adding an entrance would serve. We may comply with the letter of the law, if you will, but I don't know that it really serve the betterment of this project.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? No questions at this time. I see the applicant is here. You can step forward and present the project.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Eric Williams. I work for Stonefield Engineering and Design. I'm here with John Vitale from Stuckey Vitale Architects, representing the applicant, Manchester Wilshire LLC. Aside from what Ben presented here, I think really we want to keep this brief, but with the existing Cruise and Mir, obviously that building and that site in general doesn't meet the Big Beaver district. So what we're looking to do here is remove that building that has zero transparency. They have loading docks in the front. Really, it's an eyesore to the entire corridor itself, and obviously bring forth the building, provide transparency, and really tie together the Big Beaver district with the Crooks Road itself and extend it further north. So we do have, the 9 conditions that were mentioned. At this point, our applicant's willing to agree to all of them. We would like to request a waiver, though, for the screening wall required along Wilshire Drive. Currently, as it sits today, there is, I believe, 11 trees along Wilshire, 11 mature trees. At this point in time, we're looking to maintain those and keep the mature trees. So we'd be requesting that in place of this wall, we provide a hedgerow.
Thank you.
My name is John Vitale. I'm with the firm Stuckey and Vitale Architects. I'm here maybe to answer questions on the building itself. So I think we've designed a beautiful building, and we've incorporated a number of different textures and materials on the building in keeping with the ordinance. We work closely with the planning department in introducing some various elevation changes and scale adjustments of the building, as well as various materials. So we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions at this time for the applicant? Mr. Tagle.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to make sure I'm understanding your presentation where the ordinance requires an entrance on the Crooks Road to the Schwab's suite. That's something that you guys are okay with? Is that, you said you accepted the 9 conditions or whatever number of...
Actually, we actually responded to that by adding that sidewalk. I think that sort of addresses that connection as well. But we'd rather not have a door on that, as you
totally
mentioned.
Agree.
Yeah.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
So I think the idea would be to make that sidewalk connection on the south side of the building very intuitive, very attractive, very convenient, et cetera. Maybe there's different ways to accommodate that. Mm-hmm. And again, we've done that on two other developments within a walking distance of here.
Is that the sidewalk that I'm seeing in that rendering?
Yes.
On the south side? Okay. Yeah. Great.
So that sidewalk would actually provide access, connect to the west side of the building on Crooks Road and also all the way back to the parking lot, right? So it would provide that connectivity.
It's hard to see. The primary entrance is actually right at kind of behind this corner here in the parking lot. So a sidewalk here would provide a direct connection and access to the entrance to the building.
Do we have a relative scale between the actual proposed face of that building and the restaurant to the south? How close is that restaurant to the actual property line? Just pretty far. It is. Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Yes, Mr. Rahman.
So the other three businesses that they will have there, they also don't have any access from Crooks Road? Or they will have access?
Currently there's doorways shown on the plan, and there's a sidewalk that does connect about midway up the center of the building and extends north around.
So the other three stores, they will have their door?
They will.
Crooks.
Yes.
Any other questions right now for the applicant or the architect?
Just one
Yes, Mr.
clarification,
Grant.
if I may. On Wilshire, you talked about the trees, and now the main requirement that I see the existing trees, but the shielding of headlights and cars from Wilshire visibility, you're not eliminating that landscaping that would prevent?
The buffer?
Yes.
No, the actual location of the parking space isn't changing, but what we'd be willing to do is, in place of the screening wall, add additional shrubbery and bushes.
Okay, that's fine.
To further screen the vehicles.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Me too.
Any further comments on this item on the agenda from Planning Commission members at this time? Or are we actually ready for a resolution on this? Moving forward with the conditions that were mentioned.
Just a question.
Sure,
So
Mr.
does number 9 reflect what Mr. Krent said? That provide a wall or approved landscaping on Wilshire Boulevard? I'm on the resolution, page 93. Or do we need to amend the resolution at all? I read it, I think it incorporates everything we need.
I think just in the, whoever makes the motion to approve the resolution, just clarify for that point that an approved coniferous hedgerow in lieu of a wall along Wilshire.
Okay, I ask because it says a wall or approved landscaping, so it just seemed broad enough.
Planning Commission has the jurisdiction or direction to either require a wall or a landscaping. It sounds like the Planning Commission is okay with the landscaping, so if that's the direction of the Planning Commission, just be specific in your actual resolution.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Faison, would you like to move that resolution?
Sure. So then the approved landscaping is, could you repeat what you just said?
It would be a coniferous hedge in lieu of a wall.
Thank you. Resolved that preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed Imperium Troy multi-tenant building located on the east side of Crooks and south of Wilshire, 911 Wilshire, Section 21, within the BB, Big Beaver District be granted subject to the applicant doing the following. Provide shared access agreement. Provide a sidewalk from Crooks Road to the parking lot along the south side of the building. Increase sidewalk on Crooks to 8 feet in width. 4, add a striped crossing within the parking area to clearly distinguish pedestrian space. 5, either provide an entrance to the Charles Schwab, 5, provide direct access to Charles Schwab from Crooks Road. 6, provide building light fixtures. 7, provide 4 additional trees on Crooks Road. 8, provide decorative hardscape calculations. 9, provide a hedgerow of coniferous hedgerow of landscaping all along Wilshire Boulevard, or along Wilshire Drive to screen parking.
Moved by Mr. Faison, seconded by Mr. Tagle. Any further comments? No comments. Roll call, Ms. Zarnicki, please.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Motion passes. Congratulations.
Mr. Tagle, I want to commend the applicant on a really cool project, but more importantly, I really like their strategy of bringing a group of people that equated to the number of planning commission members. They're very effective.
So moving on to item number 8, capstone presentation by Planning Commissioner member Mr. Carlton Faison.
Okay. So Ben,
So-
take the podium?
Yeah, you can.
And that
you can
Ben,
do that.
right.
Do you want a pointer?
One you need?
I'll give you one.
Sorry.
It'll actually work if you need me. If you need a point, it's...
It's a little different being on this side of the table.
We're all friendly faces.
I'm sorry?
We're all friendly faces.
Okay.
Except me.
I'm not taking any questions.
Oh, Mr. Tagle has questions.
So I attended the Michigan Association of Planner Conference, the annual conference this last September. And that was the second conference I attended. And at that conference, I decided to do this capstone presentation to pursue a Master Citizen Planner certification. So, quick aside, I know we have some newer members on the council, and I would highly recommend that you consider going to that conference this year. There's a range of courses and sessions given, and there's a entry type level course for new planners, which I found very productive when I did that in my first in the Planning Commission. This was the second conference I attended, and I actually got as much out of this one as I got out of the first one. And then one other background comment. I left the conference feeling really good. I talked to other planning commissioners and folks from other communities, and I felt really good about our approach here and the work that our staff does on the site plans that we get and the vetting that they do before we actually talk about them and decision them. And also the dialogue that we have on our body, which I think is constructive and insightful. So I'm going to go to my first intro slide. The other thing I came away with was a feeling that Troy takes a thoughtful approach toward planning and development. And highlighting things in our master plan. And it's obviously we promote more than just these things, but housing, variety, walkability, density, etc. We saw, or I saw, that those were themes that other communities are focused on as well, Michigan and across the country. However, what I also thought about with those themes is how we often see resistance from residents when we decision some of those projects, particularly when it's a different or very different housing type or development type than what's been there before. And so thought about, how do you bridge that gap? And what I landed on was public engagement. So that's what my presentation is about, increasing public engagement to hopefully increase receptivity for some of these projects that we think are relevant and important for Troy. So one of the, this is from the map training materials. So that's Thomas Jefferson, obviously. One of the core principles is citizen involvement in the planning and development process. And the comment he makes is it's important for the citizens to be involved. But if we feel that they don't have the discretion or the knowledge to be effectively involved, you don't take the involvement away, you try to inform them. And one of the things that I would say is I think, I'm going to back up a step. I think we do a really good job of informing the citizenry in this session, right? We did more work this year to, the packets are comprehensive, but then we did work, staff did work to highlight in the PowerPoints the key points we're decisioning and the key decision criteria. So I thought that was good from an informing standpoint, but that's informing people about what's already before us. And that's a little different than public engagement. Public engagement is more bringing people into the process. There's a second bullet there, at the beginning of the process, right? So before the plans are finalized. So how do we get them involved and get their input and weigh that? The other thing that's important is that we engage a broad cross-section of people, right? When we have public hearings here, we have the people that are impacted, obviously, and that makes sense. But some of the things that we're talking about, some of the things in our master plan are about the city as a whole, right? And so we would need feedback from a broader cross-section of folks to really get good feedback on that. And it's hard. So the last point there is I know we try to do that. I know we have limited people that come to some of these meetings. Sometimes it's the same people that come to the meetings. So there's no simple solution to it, but it's an effort and a process. And why we do it, as I said earlier, to increase receptivity. So the three bullet points I make after that on the slide is from a session I attended at the MAP conference. They talked about public perceptions of planning. And this was one of the points in the survey, right? That 90% of Michigan cities have master plans. But 50% of those cities mostly adhere to those master plans. And their thesis was, well, the ones that don't adhere are situations where citizenry is not really supportive of the master plan. It's the more controversial projects. So we talk about public engagement. We talked a little bit about what it is. And I want to make sure I did touch on that. Yeah, I didn't. So I wanted to make this one comment that I got from the materials. When we talk about public engagement and what it is, public engagement informs, educates, and involves citizens before development decisions are made and permits greater consideration of their input. So now to jump to how do we do it, right? So we start with outreach, right? Getting people included. So intentional effort to connect with people across all demographies, right? Particularly underrepresented groups. So we do our outreach, we have our meeting. I think we constantly need to ask ourselves, did we get the right group of people? Who's not in the room? If our demography looks like this, millennials, minority communities, different religious communities, does our room reflect that? And continue to try to conform those two. So there were a couple of ideas on how to do that I saw in the materials. One is down there at the bottom of the slide, have notices and announcements in places and spaces used by underrepresented populations. Some examples were places of worship, schools, so including, say, staff participating in civics and government courses, community events, and community organizations. A recent issue of the Michigan Planner magazine that we get here talked about a community in Michigan, Coldwater, and what they do. And I know that's a different community and it's a smaller community, but I thought the example was illustrative. So I'm just going to give a verbatim. It says, Coldwater staff schedules forums and workshops at a variety of locations and times to reach people where they live, work, and play. For example, they had a focus group at a high school equivalency program meeting and another at a group for members for the local American Muslim Society. The city sponsors a free concert series and a farmer's market in a downtown park, and staff uses this as an opportunity to distribute information and to seek input. So again, examples of tactics that can be used, but I think you've got to apply the tactics that work for your community and also for the type of project that you're looking for. The next piece after you do the outreach is what's your actual engagement process. And so this is a consistent theme, right? Involve people at the beginning. So that's the point here. In the engagement meeting, you're presenting the issue, not the solution, not the decision. You're not going to say, this is what we've decided to do, what do you think about it? Although sometimes you might do that, and I'll get to that later. But it's a dialogue that allows people's voices to be heard. And the last thing is, I think, for it to be effective, I think officials need to put the non-negotiables up front so you don't spend time talking about things that really can't be implemented or won't be implemented. So this is a portrayal of the spectrum of public participation. So this was produced by the International Association for Public Participation. It's based on the belief that those who are affected by a decision have a right to be involved in the decision-making process. And if you look at the circle, it starts at the least intensive form of public engagement, so that will be informed, and then you go clockwise around, and it becomes more intense at every point. So consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And at different levels of engagement are recommended depending on the issue. And at every level of engagement, there's a different level of commitment that the municipal body is making to the people. And so I say different levels of engagement for different issues. And so what I saw in some materials they talked about, they kind of bucketed the issues into three categories, broad categories. So in each of those three issues, there's a problem, there's a solution, and there's a decision maker. So the first is a type 1 situation, right? So that one, there's a problem, it's commonly known, commonly understood. There's a solution that's evident and accepted. And in that scenario, the decision maker is the municipality, the leader, the vested authority, solely. Then there are type 2 situations. So that's a little bit more complex. The situation is generally understood, or problem generally agreed upon. For solutions, there's a potential range of solutions. And depending on which solution you pick, different people can get impacted differently. So you can have winners and losers. So in that scenario, they suggest the decision maker is, again, the leader, government authority, but with public input, given the impacts on the constituents. And then the third type of situation, the type 3 situation, so again, there's a problem, or there's a sense that there's a problem, but there's not really an agreement, a broad agreement that there's a problem, or that there's even an issue, right? So if you have that, then obviously you can't have a consensus around solution, right? There's, again, there's a range of what the problem can be, then there's a range of what the solutions can be, and then a range of impacts on the people. So in that type of fluid situation, the view is that the citizens need to guide that process. So I'm going to go through each of the levels fairly quickly now. So for inform, again, the least intensive, you're providing the public with information. You're not persuading them or trying to get them to agree with your viewpoint. You're letting them know what the situation is, what the decision is, and potentially why you made the decision. So, and the commitment to the public in that scenario is we're going to keep you informed. So the example they gave of that was really straightforward. So you got a busy intersection, there's a lot of accidents. What do? You put up a traffic light or some kind of traffic control mechanism. Second is consult. So this is a decision that you're going to make, but you're going to want some public input. So you're going to get public feedback on the analysis, the alternatives, and also the potential decision. Methods are public comment, periods, focus groups, surveys, etc. In this situation, you're getting feedback, but you're going to get it at a set point in the process, and then you're going to cut it off and make a decision. So in this scenario, your promise to the people is you're going to inform them, you're going to listen to their issues and acknowledge them, and you're going to give feedback on how their input affected the decision. The next level is involve. And in this one, you're going to make the decision, but you're going to have more continued interaction with the public to get their input along the way. So you need to have a defined process to involve the public. And you're going to work with the public throughout the process to understand their concerns and consider their concerns. What's important here, or what I thought was important here, is even with that level of involvement, the promise is not that you're going to build a consensus with the public, right? Your promise is you're going to involve the public and they're going to have input in forming the possible solutions. So to state that a little bit differently, your concerns and desires will be reflected in the alternatives developed. And then we'll get feedback on how that feedback and input affected the decision. So this one you would use in situations where there is an impact on the public, but you don't think it's highly controversial or very material. And then next we have collaborate. So this one is more for those type 3 issues, right? Where the problem is unclear, therefore the solution is unclear, and there's a lot of potential impacts. Here you're going to partner with the public in each aspect of the decision, including the development of the alternatives. And the first thing you're going to do is form a consensus on what the issue is, right? And as part of that consensus, what does consensus mean? Because it doesn't mean unanimity, right? So how do you define that? And the public needs to agree with that. So difficult, time-consuming, and resource-intensive. But this is one that I would think would be used with a large transformational project where, people don't, I'll say it from a planning commissioner's perspective, people don't have the perspective that we have sometimes on when we look at certain things, and they don't have the context that we have. So a situation like this, I think you're building that knowledge and that context, and hopefully defining projects better that are consistent with the wants and needs of the people and ones that will ultimately get done. So this is a pretty difficult bar to reach, but again, I think this makes sense for those really difficult projects. But this is not the last point on the spectrum. The last point on the spectrum is empower. So that's the public controlling the process and making the decisions. And I didn't see any examples of that really happening. I highlighted something that it's not, right? It's not the government putting an issue on a ballot and asking the public to vote for it, because you're not really empowering the people, you're just giving them an up or down choice. This would be a scenario where the public body decides on the issue, the choices, and the resolution. So again, we don't see that much. So I think more public engagement on the more difficult and more impactful and more controversial projects might be effective to help move them forward. I think as we do that, we need to make sure we're getting a broad cross-section of people, not just the neighbors, for example, or the people that are directly impacted, but a cross-section of the city. And the hope is that level of engagement with the transparency it shows builds trust and some more effective, difficult transformational project execution. And I'll stop there.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to item number 9.
Questions?
Questions, answers?
Comments?
Questions, comments?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought he said he's not taking.
You're not taking any questions? Any questions?
Well, I had a comment.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. You want to get back out on the spot?
He wants to sit down.
Tough crowd.
What's that? Tough crowd. Just a couple of things. I don't know if you saw the planning, the National Planning magazine, maybe last month, but recently, but it had a couple of articles, or an article about 3 communities, specifically about public engagement and how they went about it. And I thought some of the ways that they actually attracted the public to get them to the table, if you will, were very creative and clever. But the other thing I wanted to say to you about that
And that's really important, right? Because it's not just pushing out communication that's going to get the broad cross-section of people.
I'm not going to get all the details, but one of the communities had the issue or the project had to do with children. So they really kind of focused in how do we engage the kids as well, and they did it in a very creative way. The other thing about the last issue there, as far as the engagement and really letting the group or the public make the decision.
The empower part of it. Yeah.
I've really seen that successful when you're talking about, I don't, not isolated, but groups, maybe not large groups, but groups that are, this is for them and about them. And to really, we as the public body or as the facilitator really needs to hear, what do you want? What will better serve you? How can this project improve your life or empower you to do something more than what you're doing today? So I've seen that happen, in localized situations as opposed to, across the entire community. So it is possible. And quite honestly, in my world, it's being talked about all the time about public engagement and getting people involved as part of the process.
Right.
So thank you, and very nice job.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yes. Oh, me?
Hamantha's got a question, I think.
It's actually a quick comment. I want to say thank you for the presentation. I think what you said about public engagement and civic outreach is really important. From a high school perspective, last year I took a class, AP Government, and I like coming to these meetings, knowing about what's going on around the city, but what about the students around me? So what the teacher did was every semester he requires all students to attend 2 city council meetings, has a worksheet, fills them all out as a grade. So I want to say thank you for bringing that up. I think it's for sure recommended around Troy for people my age to come in and hear about these hearings. So thank you.
And it's important that you're here for that reason as well. To your predecessor, I think, shared information, and we had several planning commission meetings where there was a large number of Troy High students, and we have signed some of those forms, right? So, yes.
Can you go back to your empowerment slide for just a second? The definition of empowerment.
Yeah. Yep.
A public body is developing the choices and asking the public to vote on them is not true empowerment. True empowerment is when the public decides and also determines the process. Maybe I'm reaching here, but I kind of feel like to some degree being on the planning commission is empowerment, right? I mean, we're all residents of the city of Troy. We don't get paid to do this job. We are a cross-section, right? A representative cross-section, not only professionally, but demographically. And we are making decisions and we are finding solutions that impact the city as a whole. And I would also say that it's been my experience since I've been on the Planning Commission that the city, and in particular the city manager's office, has done a nice job in creating focus groups on certain projects that absolutely impact the city, and has put together focus groups and committees on things like the city budget, and has invited, again, a cross-section of the public to come in and talk about what the city budget is going to look like. And we did it when we talked about doing the Civic Center development. And so while I think that what you're talking about is important and should be a priority, I think you can be proud to know that you're coming from a community that's already embracing a lot of this. I mean, certainly we can improve.
So I'm glad you said that, because I meant to say that earlier. And, I didn't pick this topic because I thought we were doing anything wrong, right? And I said a couple of times up front, I came away feeling really good after talking to some others about how we approach things and how we do things. But you mentioned the Civic Center project. I think that's more of like a type 3 situation, where some people think one thing, a number of people think something else.
Right.
And then something that looked like it was finished was presented. It wasn't finished, but I think that was a perception people had. So there was a feeling that there wasn't enough engagement. And I'm not sure there was enough. I don't want to say there wasn't enough education. I think your point about our body and what we know, I think we know a lot because of what we do, what we see, what we read. I think the key is how do you educate more people, give more people that information when everybody's busy, right? And may not be highly interested in those things. So, again, how do you bring people into those processes when it's something really impactful and significant like that?
Oh, it's absolutely.
But I know we make that effort every day.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
And I, like I said, I think we do it well. We can always look for ways to improve, but
and nobody has it figured out.
No.
Right? It's a process.
Absolutely.
Right? And then every project is different. So maybe you nail it on one project, but another project has different constituencies, different impacts. So you start all over again. Then who do you get in the room? How do you make sure they're engaged and involved and educated? So
absolutely, but I do think that you really picked a very relevant topic tonight, and I appreciate that, because we've been talking about it, and I don't think that we should lose sight of the value and importance of your capstone project. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to, first of all, you clearly put a lot of thought into this, and it showed, and I appreciate that. I think the most important takeaway from this is, you've said it a couple of times, is the second bullet point. We have to. You're never done. Technology changes, demographics changes. Change is inevitable, and if you think you've got it, you've got it all figured out, well, you don't, because there's always a better way to do things.
And the next project is coming. Right.
Exactly. Now, some communities have the resources or the wherewithal. They've actually hired an engagement professional whose job it is to focus on this. We don't have that luxury. We try our best. We've taken some steps that you've addressed tonight, but you're never done. And we're always looking for suggestions, and we're always looking for ways to be better.
Can I make
one of the other things that was mentioned at the planning conference is that planning departments are under-resourced.
this isn't really devil's advocate question or comment, but how much of the onus do we put on developers? Because I think one of the key points is it's getting that public engagement at the beginning. And so that onus, from my perspective, should be on the developer to engage the public at the outset, get that input, because we don't control what comes in the door. Right? I mean, we can't control what comes in the door. Our hands, your hands, are tied sometimes about how much discretion you have on things. So, that developer, I feel, needs to have more of the onus at that initial stages. And some developers are better than others. I think we had a good example today, Mr. Sawyer, Cooper's Hawk. He clearly had been involved with his neighbors for several years and tried to make, you're not going to make everybody happy, but he tried his best to do that.
Right.
So that's it's not a devil's advocate.
No, no,
it's something to think about. It's the developer who has to really be at that initial stage.
And also, it's also a scale, right? So every project has impacts. But what I was really trying to highlight is the ones that have really large impacts, where there's more than just the developer that's a stakeholder in that. The city is, the residents are, the government is, et cetera. But I agree with you, right? Building consensus at every party in the process should be trying to build consensus.
So just one final thought. I think all of us up here are very aware of the efforts that staff actually puts forth in trying to have that public engagement through various channels of communication on the various projects that come before us well ahead before that happens. And I think what we've seen just over the years and what's typical is that usually the public engagement is more happens more frequently when it impacts somebody in their backyard. So it's 20/20 hindsight versus then public engagement up front with projects that are outside of their neighborhood limits. And we see that over and over. So I think maybe that area is one domain that the city can look at, how to reach out to a neighborhood that is being impacted with a certain project, but actually communicate that in a broader sense and allow other neighbors from other communities to bring feedback or be engaged with that project. And I think that's probably one area where we can improve it.
So that's a great point, and that was probably better said than the way I said it, where I kept saying broad engagement, cross section of people. That's what I meant, because to your point, big project, maybe not even a huge project, big project, different project, it's the neighbors that are going to come out, right? Because the neighbors are going to see and feel that impact directly. But if it's in our master plan and in our zoning ordinance, we've thought about it in the context of the city as a whole. So I think there should be other folks with a broader perspective giving their feedback as well. It's just as valuable as that of the neighbors, I think. So, well said.
Yeah, thank you again.
Yep. All right.
Nice job.
Thanks, everyone.
So moving on to item number 9, Planning Commission 2018 Annual Report.
So this is something you see this every year. We've prepared this every year since 2010. This is actually a requirement of the Municipal Planning Act. Planning commissions are required to prepare annual reports indicating what you were up to the previous year. If you think we weren't busy in 2018, just look at the list. We got a lot accomplished. So I wanted to share this with you, and I think it's really helpful to take a step back and look in the rearview mirror and see all the things we accomplished as a board. This will be forwarded on to City Council for their consideration as well. So this is more of an FYI for the Planning Commission, but I wanted this presented at a public meeting.
Thank you. Any comments on that at this point? No comments. So we will move on to item number 10, annual elections of officers. Mr. Savanat, any specific order that we need to?
No, I attached the bylaws for your consideration. We are required by the bylaws to elect a chairperson and a vice chairperson every year in January, and we're also required to make a recommendation to City Council for the Zoning Board of Appeals representative. So we last year we did not have a lot of people interested in volunteering for the Zoning Board of Appeals position. I sent an email out a couple weeks ago just kind of encouraging planning commissioners to consider serving as a Zoning Board of Appeals representative. In terms of order, it's probably easiest to do it one at a time, starting with the chair, then the vice chair, then the Zoning Board of Appeals representative. So again, we would elect chairperson, elect the vice chairperson, recommend a Zoning Board of Appeals representative for City Council.
Okay. So at this time, we open it up to a nomination for the chair position for the Planning Commission. Anyone wants to make a nomination? Ms. Cruz.
I would nominate Carlton Faison for chair.
So we have a nomination from Ms. Cruz for the chair position, nominating Mr. Carlton Faison. Do we need a second on that? And seconded by Mr. Tagle. And just take a vote. Is that?
If there's anyone else
anyone else that
nominated?
Any other nominations at this time? No other nominations? Then we can move on to roll call.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Vote for myself.
You can vote yes.
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Motion passes. Mr. Faison is the new chair.
Thank you for your support.
We move on to vice chair position. Open it up to nominations for the vice chair position.
I'd like to
Mr. Faison.
I'd like to nominate Tom Krant as vice chair.
Mr. Faison nominates Mr. Tom Krant for the vice chair position. Any other nominations at this time?
Need a second.
Oh, and a second. Can I get a second for the nomination?
A second.
Seconded by Ms. Fowler. Any other nominations at this time? Here are none. We'll move on to the roll call. Ms. Zarnicki, please.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Krant, on being elected for the vice chair position. Now we will open it up to recommendations for the ZBA position.
So recognizing that we have 2 planning commission meetings per month, it's a big commitment. So we're looking for someone who's willing to dedicate a third Tuesday of every month. It's 1 meeting per month. So you're basically 3 or 4 Tuesdays would be locked up. Ideally, we're looking for a veteran planning commission member with at least 1 year's experience. I think that's probably the best solution. But if there's not a returning planning commission member who's interested, we could consider one of our 2 newer members. It's an awful lot to put on a new member's plate, I think. I'm not suggesting that these 2 individuals couldn't handle it. I'm positive they both could. But I guess, is there anyone interested? Look, first of all, I'll ask the returning planning committee. It's your meeting, Mr. Chairman. I don't mean to take over. But
That's fine. That was going to be my next question.
I guess I did take over.
Anyway, anyone wants to volunteer? Anyone volunteering for the ZBA position?
Anyone want to make a nomination?
So we start with the volunteer and then...
That's what I was getting at.
Mr. Fitting?
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Mr. Edson.
We were appointed by the mayor and approved by council to the planning commission. We knew, or should have known at that time, that there would be a representative to the zoning board of appeals. In my 12 years on the board, and Mr. Tagle, who's been there equally long, can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a tradition that has rotated through the Planning Commission. Everybody takes their turn. If I'm looking at a roster, Carlton Faison has a bye. He just became chairman. He's going to have his hands full. You just finished 2 years. You're entitled to a rest. John Tagle did it. Tom Krent did it. I don't think we can impose on our 2 new members this additional job, just getting your feet in. This is a position of the zoning board is to round out our education in dealing with issues coming before us in the Planning Commission. You know, you can't really sell a product unless you know how it's made, and variances are an important part of the process. So it's a long way of saying, Karen, your turn in the bucket.
That's a nomination, but we need a second.
I'll second.
We got a nomination for Mr. Hudson and a second by Mr. Krant. Ms. Cruz, you have the floor. Any comments?
You know, I've had my own personal reasons for not stepping up to the plate sooner on being the ZBA representative and going, if you know, assuming I'm going to step up to the plate, you know, I'm going into it with some apprehension about, frankly, some of the stories that Ms. Koopa came back with respect to some of the ZBA meetings and how they're run and how they're handled. And I have some apprehension about going into a board that maybe isn't as professional as this one is. To be honest, I lack patience with people who can't do their job or be professional while they're serving in a capacity. So, I will do it. I will accept the nomination, and I'll give up another Tuesday out of what I think is an already pretty full calendar. And I'll see how it goes. But it is with some apprehension.
Karen, we have more faith in you, I think, than you have in yourself. You have never been a shrinking violet. And
well, no, I'm not that. I'm not that.
You are going to be able to handle this job very well. And maybe you can clean up that crew.
Yeah, I was going to say,
help.
Karen, you could probably add some positive angle to the whole situation if you find it not going smoothly as it should.
Either that or find a new career in cage fighting or...
Well, Ms. Cruz, have you watched any of the meetings? They're not that bad. You can tame them.
Oh, I can tame them. Yay.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Cruz, for stepping up to the ZBA position.
We didn't vote.
We didn't vote. We will do the vote first.
I'm guessing that it's going to pass.
I was not going to skip that part. So we'll do the voting. Ms. Arnicki, please.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz? Get it out. Get it out.
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
I say congratulations, Ms. Cruz.
Yes,
Oh,
congratulations.
you people so owe me a drink.
So this actually goes as a recommendation to the City Council.
Yes.
For the next meeting. So moving on to item number 11, public comment for items on the current agenda. Anyone in the audience that wishes to speak to an item that was on the agenda this evening? Sure. Please, once again, just identify yourself.
I need to sign in again. Mary Bogish again. I just remember Don Edmonds and how he had a reverence for trees. And I think those trees on that Beaumont site, there's some very, very large beech trees. And there are old growth trees there that have been many, many years. And it just breaks my heart to see those cut down. And I don't know what those neighbors that back up to it will feel, but I think they're going to feel the impact. You think of impervious surface of parking lot versus the absorption that those large trees have. There's going to be an impact in the natural world and for the people around and for the whole community. So I would hope you already voted, but at least you're trying with your study to involve people more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Just for the record, this is not a public hearing, and it was not a special use. It was preliminary site plan review, but there's a little bit of history with Beaumont and the neighbors to the south. So we informed every resident within 300 feet by mail that this is going to be on the agenda this evening. So every resident that backed up to this received a notice in the mail.
Mr. Anthony?
Yes.
When I was in exile for that first item on the agenda, I happened to look up and see there is an oil painting hanging in the lobby. It's a tree. And if you look carefully, you'll see on there, "Thank you for protecting the wildlife and trees in the city of Troy, Hill Elementary School, 2016. I thought, it's kind of touching that after our tree ordinance was passed, that they did something like this, and the city hung it in City Hall.
Yeah, thank you for that note. Yeah. Where is it hanging?
Right outside here, in the little alcove.
You had a lot of time sitting there, you know.
In exile.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that wishes to make a comment? If not, we'll move on to item number 12, Planning Commission comments. We'll start with Ms. Sarnicki.
None, thank you.
Her month.
I just want to say thank you. It's my first meeting, and it's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No comment. Ms. Fowler. Mr. Cornett. Mr. Hudson.
If Karen's still speaking to me, I spent 10 years on the zoning board before I was appointed to council, or planning commission. You'll like it. You will like it.
Because I love statutory law.
Look at it as an adventure.
Ms. Cruz.
No, thank you.
Mr. Faison.
Nothing for me.
Mr. Tagle.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Savana.
Ms. Landmesser asked 3 questions earlier on. I'd like to take a stab at really briefly answering those, if you wouldn't. First question was who approves the city council agenda? That responsibility is on the city manager, who approves the city council agenda. The second question, who approves private roads? The ordinance lays out those situations where private roads are permitted and includes standards for those private roads. In the example of a site condominium, the Planning Commission approves the preliminary site plan. The engineering department reviews the design of the road and approves the design of the road, and then ultimately city council accepts the private road. The third question, how long is an approved site plan valid? We had the third petitioner this evening was a preliminary site plan application. From this evening's date, they have 3 years of validity before it will expire. So they have 3 years before they have 3 years in which to submit for final site plan approval, which is engineering design. If they don't submit to the engineering department for final approval within 3 years, preliminary site plan approval expires.
I told Ms. Landmaster it was 2 years, but that's for conditional rezoning, right?
That may be. For preliminary site plans, 3.
Okay. I just want to make sure I didn't give Ms. Landmaster the incorrect information.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Faison.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? What about the site plan is approved? Is there a time frame where they have to begin construction?
There's a time limit, 3 years from preliminary to submit for final, and then once it's for final, you have 3 years to finish your final, and then once final, there is a time constraint. I don't know what that is, and I don't have the ordinance at my fingertips, but there is.
It's something similar?
Similar, I think less. I think it's going to be like probably a year. Because once you've invested in the preliminary and the final, you've invested considerable time and expense, so there's not as much leeway required. Because once you've taken those two steps, it's...
Okay.
You've got so much entitlement that you're really close to going.
I think you can ask for extension, right?
You can ask for, that's a great point.
1 year extension.
Thank you for that. So if it's going to expire, you can, recognizing it's going to expire, you can come to the Planning Commission. I'm seeking an extension for these reasons, death in a family or what have you, and the Planning Commission can grant an extension on a year-by-year basis.
To supplement that, if I may, it's my understanding that the apartments down here, the Amber Apartments, we're going on 5 years now. It's my understanding that you got 3 years to start and do it, but if you're doing construction, kind of stretching it out within limits, you can do it. You just can't abandon it, but 5 years is...
Yeah, the verbiage, you're exactly right. That's a building code issue, and as long as you're making, Mr. Tagle would know the verbiage, but it's something to the effect of, as long as you're making progress, and that can be at a snail's crawl.
It has been.
And it had, well, that's being insulting. Never mind. I was going to say that's being insulting to the snail, but I wouldn't say that.
May I also clarify something else I said to Mrs. Landmesser with respect to how an item gets on the agenda? Yes, it's the city manager who puts it, but her follow-up question to me was who makes the decision to tell the manager that it's ready to go? And I gave the example in Ottawa. We're still working on the conditional rezoning agreement. So that the city manager can't say, well, I'm putting this on the agenda now because it's not ready to be put on the agenda. So maybe that's just a slight clarification.
Mr. Carlisle.
No comment.
No comment. I just had one quick comment. I just wanted to thank this body for giving me the opportunity to serve as chair for the past 2 years. It's been a great learning experience with the diversity of the projects that we've had had come before us in the past 2 years, and it was a really great opportunity to be part of the body and serve as your chair. And I look forward to Mr. Faison, Mr. Krent, and Ms. Cruz doing an excellent job for the next 12 months. So I'm looking forward to stepping over and taking a break. So thank you all for coming, and we are adjourned.
You're here.